I'd like to ask each of our panelists to pose a question to the opposing side.
I'd like to ask a question of Matthew Parris, and I am tempted to ask if you know what the words ad hominem mean, but I will refrain from asking that. Instead, I would like to ask about your fascinating claim that you have great knowledge and power to intuit the feelings of the American people, which is denied to those of us who actually live here. And I would like to ask you, therefore, why you claim that the American people will not support this role of global policemen if, in fact, they have supported American troops being stationed in East Asia and Europe for over 60 years, and why you think that Republican and conservative voters in particular do not support an interventionist role for the United States when they consistently back presidents and presidential candidates such as Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, George W. Bush, and John McCain, who are in fact leading advocates of intervention
I must remind the panelists that these are questions, not speeches. So please keep the question brief, and Matthew Parris, please keep your answer brief.
Well, of course, I know a great deal less of the American people than almost everybody else on the panel. I only have the hunches that I get from those whom I know and the time that I spent here. And also a little bit that I know about the history of the British Empire and British colonialism, in much of which I've lived in my own childhood. And my impression, and I may be wrong, is that there's a good patriotic spirit in America for invasions of foreign countries, where those invasions can be seen as palpably in the national interest in order to defend America from people abroad. But that there isn't the same interest in administering other countries. There isn't the same interest in prolonged occupations of other countries. There isn't the same interest in doing what policemen do abroad. And that it's only as long as America is winning in those circumstances that public opinion remains positive. It quite quickly turns against when conditions seem to be becoming adverse.
Ellen Laipson, who do you have a question for?
I'd like to ask Michael Mandelbaum to tell us how he would get to the end state that he desires of the U.S. as the world's policeman. What would you do? You spoke very disparagingly of the UN. What would you do with the 17 current peace missions that the United States has supported by its vote authorizing on the Security Council, the 100,000 soldiers and policemen that are deployed worldwide in these trouble spots? Is it your view that those operations should simply be shut down and go away?
Not at all. I'm delighted with them. I think we should have more of them. I think the United States should support them, but they add up to only a small fraction of the policing that's necessary in the world. In fact, I claim that the United States does police the world and does do so effectively, and let me give you 3 examples. In East Asia, contrary to what Mr. Bremmer said, the United States does a very effective job of containing, although not preventing, the acquisition of nuclear weapons by North Korea with the 7th Fleet, with its security treaties with Japan and South Korea. Without them, East Asia would be a much more dangerous place. Similarly, in the Persian Gulf, although the United States has not dealt with complete success with Iran, our military presence over the horizon and our naval presence assures the free flow of petroleum, which is a global necessity. A policeman walks the beat. The United States does that in the Persian Gulf and in East Asia. It's extremely important that it do so. To the extent that other countries can chip in, all the better. But they just don't do enough, and I don't have any expectation that they will.
Michael Mandelbaum, who do you have a question for?
Well, I'd like to make a comment.
No, it's question time, not comment time.
Well, then I'll turn it into a question. Mr. Parris gave, I would say, a rather broad view of American anti-imperialism, but not altogether inaccurate, so let me give a reply in a similar spirit, and it follows on to what Ellen Laipson said in my response. I would say in response to your comment about American opposition to the British Empire, it's a question. We thought we could do it better than you did, but we were wrong. Come back. We would be delighted for the British to do more by way of global policing. So will you, as an influential member of the political class in Britain, commit to agitating in favor of the Royal Navy growing larger rather than smaller, so that it can resume the policing of the Atlantic and the Mediterranean that it did so well and so necessarily and with such great benefit to everyone, including that large free rider across the Atlantic, the United States, in the 19th century.
Well, I'll reciprocate your humility. You suggest that you or the Americans have learnt that imperialism, indeed British imperialism, was a better thing than you thought it was at the time. I would say that we British have learnt that imperialism was not as good a thing as we thought that it was at the time, that there is a limit to the extent that a country that has no economic global predominance can continue to police large sections of the globe. We learnt that to our very great cost. It's a lesson that we've learnt, and I think we're not going to unlearn it, and if we have any advice for you, it is not to repeat the mistake.
Matthew Parris, do you have a question for someone here?
Yes. Again, it's to Mr. Mandelbaum. And it's a serious question rather than an ad hominem one. I'd like you to deal with the question of legitimacy with policemen. A policeman in New York works for an authority that is elected, enforces laws which have been enacted by people who have been elected, and is in many ways of the community that he polices. America as world policeman would be a very different kind of animal. There would be no such presumed consent. There's a real problem about legitimacy,
please, sir.
About authority, and I wonder how you answer that problem.
I answer it as follows. The United States, as the global policeman, is not as legitimate as the New York City police force is. And it cannot be because there is no global government, no global state to give it legitimacy. But it has enough legitimacy because nobody opposes it, as they would if they didn't like it and felt threatened by it. Indeed, as I say in my book, The Case for Goliath, I think there is a threat. There is a threat to the American role as the world's government, but it doesn't come from other countries. It comes from the mounting costs of social welfare, of our entitlement programs. The great threat to the American role as the world's policeman and to global order comes not from China, Pache Mr. Bremmer, it comes from Medicare.